Support comes from the Arizona Inn, a four-diamond, family-owned historic resort hotel and restaurant on Elm Street near the U of A. Information is at arizonainn.com.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Nintzel, the executive editor of the Tucson Weekly and Tucson Local Media, and we're here to talk Zona politics. Joining me today, Tucson Weekly reporter Danyelle Khmara and Arizona Daily Star reporter Hank Stephenson. Thanks to both of you for joining me.
Thanks for having us on.
So let's start off with Congressional District 2. We've had some recent polling by the New York Times. It does show Ann Kirkpatrick in the lead. There's different ways to slice it. They run a couple different scenarios of who might be turning out to vote. Kirkpatrick's in the lead in all of these, but their most likely scenario has her at about 50%, and Leah Marquez Peterson, the Republican in this race, at 39%. Hank, what do you take away from this?
I think it shows what a lot of people on the ground have been feeling. You know, wave year for Democrats. Ann Kirkpatrick is much more well known, even though she never represented this area before. She's former congressperson, was up there for several years, has been doing really well in fundraising, as you often see from incumbents or recent incumbents. Leah Marquez Peterson, was kind of slow to get off. I haven't seen her around a lot. She doesn't have the money that Kirkpatrick does. So I think that there's, I agree, and I think most people in town would agree that there's a very good chance that the Democrats are able to win this seat back this year. And
flip it into the blue column. And Danyelle, one of the things that kind of jumped out at me in this poll, it showed that Kirkpatrick had a favorability of about 40%, unfavorable 38%, 22% didn't know who she was. But with Leah Marquez Peterson, 50% almost did not know who she was. Her favorables were 27% and her unfavorables were about 24%. So it sounds like she definitely has some name ID problems despite her high profile in the business community.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, she is a political newcomer. So like Hank said, Ann Kirkpatrick, she's been a state lawmaker, she's been in Congress, so I think a lot more people know who she is, and they know her voting record, they know her better.
And Leah hasn't been making the rounds. I mean, I haven't seen her a whole lot on TV. She hasn't come on this show. She's been kind of hard to find this election cycle.
Yeah. She has been elusive, reluctant to do a sit-down interview with me, certainly, and it seems like the GOP is pushing this narrative that Ann Kirkpatrick is a radical leftist, and the Dems are saying that Leah would be a rubber stamp for Trump and the GOP leadership. And Hank, you've covered Ann Kirkpatrick's campaigns in the past. Do you think this whole idea that she's a radical leftist holds much water?
I think those are talking points you see no matter who the candidate is. They're going to be a rubber stamp for Trump if they're a Republican. They are a radical liberal if they're a Democrat. In the past, Ann Kirkpatrick has kind of run away from her liberal side. She touted a high NRA endorsement ranking in previous election cycles when she was representing kind of northern Arizona. But this cycle, she's embracing it. She's coming back and is talking about her vote for the Affordable Care Act, is talking about gun control, is really kind of embracing her liberal side now that she's running down in Tucson. But no, radical liberal, no. She's a kind of, middle of the road liberal, I guess.
And Danyelle, certainly during the primary, a lot of the other candidates were complaining that, and I think at one point Matt Hines said, I wish we'd elect a Democrat, and I think that was a reference to.
Well, I think in the primary, she was quite possibly the least liberal candidate. She was against certain measures that most of the other candidates were for. Abolish ICE. I wouldn't say all of them were for it, but most of them were for abolish ICE. She was not. Legalizing recreational marijuana, most of them were for that. She was not. She said she'd need to look into that further. So she was definitely like the most moderate candidate in the primary.
And this is a very swing and competitive district, Hank.
Yeah, this is a district that Martha McSally barely won 4 years ago, crushed it in 2 years ago, and looks very likely to go back into Democratic hands this year. So it's kind of all over the map. It blows a lot with the national wins, and we'll kind of see what happens this year.
And how about CD1? We've talked about this race on the show before, but Danyelle, do you have any sense that Republican Wendy Rogers is starting to pick up steam as a challenge to Democratic Congressman Tom O'Halloran? Rogers had her own poll showing her up, but she's not getting any kind of national support from the NRCC, which is an indication that there's not a lot of faith in her.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to say. Again, it seems like this is along party lines, that, it seems like most Republicans that are taking a side are coming out in support of her, and Democrats are supporting O'Halloran. So, I mean, it's kind of hard to say. I think this is a competitive district, but like you said, she was up in the poll that she put out. So we don't know what those metrics were. So, I think it's really hard to say.
And I just saw the press release on that poll, and it was Wendy Rogers versus Invisible Tom. So I'm not sure if they asked people if they were planning to vote for Invisible Tom.
Yeah, people might not know who Invisible Tom is.
Yeah, well, you can't see him, so that makes it hard to know who Invisible Tom is if you think about it.
And O'Halloran has been a very moderate member of Congress. He was a former Republican, switched to an independent, slowly became a Democrat. There was something in the New York Times a while ago about how he votes with Trump. Him and Sinema both vote with Trump more often than some of our very conservative members of Congress, Andy Biggs, Paul Gosar. So he's always been a very, he was a very moderate Republican. Now he's a very moderate Democrat. That's the kind of voter that people up there in northern Arizona, or that's the kind of candidate that people up there in northern Arizona like, kind of like Ann Kirkpatrick used to be for them.
And we have a poll out from NBC News and Marist College showing that it's neck and neck in the U.S. Senate race, Hank.
Every poll shows that it's neck and neck in the Senate race. Most of them are putting Sinema a couple of points ahead, probably within the margin of error. I think this one did the same. It was 48% for Sinema versus 45% for McSally. When the numbers are that close, polling's kind of a shot in the dark. It tells you a snapshot, a kind of a guess at a snapshot at a moment. But throughout this campaign, we've seen that Sinema maybe is just barely leading. And she's been leading on the fundraising. I think a last campaign finance report showed she had about $8 million versus the $6 million that McSally had brought in. A lot of the spending is going to obviously be coming from outside groups. So, candidate to candidate comparison on the numbers doesn't mean what it used to. But she's been running a very strong campaign, as has Martha McSally. So this one will come down to the wire on Election Day, I'm sure.
Right, and I'm sure with a lot of polling, it's difficult to predict what the turnout model is going to be in this year because politics have gotten so scrambled at this point, and also reaching people who have cell phones and a lot of challenges there. But Danyelle, Martha McSally really pushing this notion that Sinema is a radical Democrat, just as we're seeing with Ann Kirkpatrick down here, and that's based on some of her comments and votes at the Arizona legislature, along with some of the anti-war protests she was involved in the run-up to the Iraq War. But Sinema's got a pretty moderate record as well.
She does, yeah, she does. In fact, I believe she was one of the few Democrats that supported that initiative a few months ago to support ICE. And so, yeah, I mean, she does have a really kind of moderate history. Like Hank was saying earlier, it seems like the way politics are now, all Democrats are considered radical leftists, and all Republicans are voting with Trump. And so I think that when McSally says she's radical leftist, really what she's saying is she's Democrat.
Well, and in the past, she was a radical leftist. She ran for the legislature the first time as a Green Party candidate. She described herself as a proto-socialist, which has come back to haunt her ever since.
And certainly the pink tutu.
The pink tutu, the anti-war protests.
Who could forget that?
All of that was kind of before she got elected or in her very first years at the legislature. Within a very short time, she started befriending Republicans, really building up up her working across the aisle credentials. She became buddies with Russell Pierce, who was kind of the Joe Arpaio of the legislature, I guess is a nice way to describe him. She really veered from the far left to the middle of the road very early on in her career. So if you're looking at, the very early cinema, you can make a case for radical liberal. But if you look at the votes, the legislation she's passed, all the time she was in the state legislature, now when she's in Congress, she's a very, very moderate member of Congress, and has angered plenty of Democrats for her votes.
Yeah, and a similar, I think, phenomenon to the CD1 or CD2 primary. We saw people saying, "Oh, Sinema's not even a real Democrat."
Yeah.
But on the other, and conversely, we've seen Martha McSally go from a moderate congressperson representing Congressional District 2 to a pretty heavy-duty Trump supporter. Dan.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, and I know I've probably talked about this on your show before, but one of the interviews that I did with her back in September of 2017, right after Trump ended DACA, and she was still in support of a way to help these young people stay in the country, a path to citizenship, and she since pulled her support of that. She's, and that to me just seemed like a really obvious way that her politics changed in a way that really just affects a lot of people. And she also, I remember she didn't want to talk so much about how she felt about Trump before he was elected. And now she seems very willing to talk about her support of Trump and the way that she agrees with some of his policies. So she definitely seems like she's gotten more to the right.
And much less willing to talk about Jeff Flake and John McCain, as she had, when she first kind of came onto the political scene. One, running as a Republican from Southern Arizona, you have to be a more moderate Republican. Talking about supporting DACA kids goes a long way towards, I think, getting kind of the middle of the road independent voters to think that, oh, you're not one of those crazy Republicans like Donald Trump. And then when you're running for statewide office, the calculus is different. You're trying to win Maricopa County, you're trying to win Sun City, those
and
places.
A primary.
In a primary, and then even in the general, you've got to lock up those people as well. It's not just playing to a kind of more moderate Republican base down here, it's playing to the entire state. And you've really seen that transformation happen. And
as you said, this is a race for Jeff Flake's seat, and of course he's stepping down, but Danielle, he's been in the headlines this week for this push to extend the vote on Kavanaugh in order to have this FBI investigation that evidently wrapped up yesterday.
Yeah, so I mean, that's been the thing that's been consuming the news for the last several weeks, but especially after we saw Christine Blasey Ford's testimony and Kavanaugh's testimony last week, and then the following day, he indicated that he was going to support him going to the next stage, going to a confirmation hearing, and then these two women stopped him when he was getting in the elevator, and now the infamous tape that I'm sure everybody's seen about them confronting him.
Look at me when I'm talking to you.
Yeah, exactly. Sexual assault survivors who, it's hard to hear what they had to say without feeling something for them. And the look at me when I'm talking to you, because he was kind of looking down at the ground, and you could see when he looked up at them in his face that he was really struggling with this decision that he had made and what he was about to do. And then when they were in the committee hearing, he took a Democratic colleague aside that he's been friends with for a long time, and they talked, and some other senators left the floor, and he ended up calling Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, who are two other Republicans that have been kind of a key possible swing votes on Kavanaugh, and they said that they would back the idea that the FBI could do a week-long investigation, which, like you said, it just wrapped up. Flake hasn't said if he's going to support Kavanaugh or not, but he did say that the investigation looked thorough and that there was no new information to corroborate Christine Blasey Ford's testimony. So that sounds kind of telling, but the suspense continues. We'll see what happens tomorrow, since the hearings do begin tomorrow.
Yeah,
sounds like.
Flake is saying, he was very concerned about the reputation of the institutions.
Yeah, I had heard that it wasn't necessarily about the confrontation in the elevator, which was the real high-profile thing that happened right before, and a lot of people thought it changed his mind, but it was more like, oh, we're the Senate. We need to, take this slow and not let this divide kind of rip us apart, which is, very flaky. And at the end of the day, it sounds like, he gave him a week to go investigate. The outcome of that investigation, I mean, it's a 1-week FBI investigation of kind of a very limited scope. So nobody was expecting any real bombshells out of that. When no bombshells appeared, looks like he's going to go along and vote with this.
And Flake really has had a promising political career. He went from congressman to U.S. Senate, and it seems as though he really lost the base of the Republican Party here and was concerned that he was going to lose a primary, which is why he decided not to run again. But he really challenged Trump, and that seems to have kind of damaged his future, Hank.
Well, maybe. We hear so much about Flake 2020. Is he gearing up for a presidential run against Trump? Who knows? But yeah.
That would be brutal.
The fear was that he couldn't make it through a primary. That's been something that McCain has fought against in this state for the last couple election cycles that he's been up. The Republican primary voters have been getting farther and farther to the right. John McCain and Kyle have not been moving along with them and have kind of found themselves unable to get through a primary election or, increasingly tight primary elections, but still probably would have played very well in a general election here in Arizona.
And Hank, I want to switch over to the state house races. You broke a big story this week about state lawmaker Todd Clodfelter after a website revealed some personal news about him.
Yeah, this one, our great political reporter Joe Ferguson at the Daily Star has some web scrapers just out there looking for new websites with lawmakers or candidates' names. One day he got a notification that this new site had gone up online and sent me a link. And the site was very detailed. The anonymous people who did their homework, who put it up, obviously did their homework. The allegation essentially was that Todd Clodfelter had put up a Ashley Madison account. And if you don't remember Ashley Madison, give it a Google. It was quite an episode. It's a website that caters to extramarital affairs. It's for guys who are married to go up on there and find hookups. He set up the account in 2010, about the time he was making his first run for the state house. He wasn't elected until 2016, and the hack on Ashley Madison happened in 2015. As far as we know, he closed down his account in 2015. But I called him about it and said, hey, there's this website, don't know who put it up, saying you have an Ashley Madison account. He said, I'm not recalling anything along those lines. Let me call you back. Of course he didn't. So I called him back the next day and was very impressed that he just kind of owned it. He said, yeah, most of that stuff's true. I've talked with my wife about it. We've been through couples counseling. I don't know what bearing this has on my ability to represent the people here. But to some degree, he's always represented himself as a family man. I think a lot of people, especially in the past when gay marriage was more of an issue before the U.S. Supreme Court settled it, look at Republican lawmakers and say they want to be in our bedrooms. And still there's some of that. The site kind of tied back to some of his votes that he's taken in the past about giving reasons why the person wanting an abortion has to give reasons, and said, well, what if they were in an extramarital affair? Trying to tie it to some kind of policy. Clodfelter, to his credit, kind of owned up to the whole thing, said, yeah, I did that. It was dumb, shouldn't have done it. It really hurt my family. But if this is all they've got on me, then, this is a pretty poor campaign against me.
And to be clear, he said he never had an affair. He was just messaging with people on the site, which I think the site was mostly robots anyway. Not that he knew that, but.
Yeah, it turns out there weren't a whole lot of hot young singles looking for older married men on this website. To begin with.
That's a different website, I think, called Sugar Daddy. But this race, this is Legislative District 10, which is central Tucson, kind of south of Speedway Boulevard, and it is one of the most competitive in the state. It's split district. The other representative is Rep. Kirsten Engel, who's a Democrat.
Right.
So you have Clodfelter kind of managed to do an upset. He knocked out a sitting lawmaker last time, and this year he's up against a political newcomer, Domingo de Grazia. Danyelle, talk a little bit about who Domingo is.
Yeah, so Domingo de Grazia is a lawyer, and he works with families and children that are going through the foster care system. He's also the son of the famous artist Ted de Grazia, yeah, I mean, he participated in the clean elections debate. I think it might have been last week. There are no clean elections candidates in that district, but all the candidates participated in that debate apart from Clodfelter. This was before Hank's report, so it wasn't because of that. And he has a lot of the kind of positions that you would expect from Democrats. So nothing too surprising. I thought that he seemed very kind of prepared and up on the issues, and had a lot of kind of things to say that were consistent with Kirsten Engel.
Also a flamenco guitar player.
Oh, right.
Maybe the most interesting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sure.
He can take Cam Bennett's place of playing a little guitar.
We do need a new singer at the legislature.
We've missed out on that. Hank, the Democrats are obviously targeting certain districts to try to win back some seats. This is one of them.
Yeah, and I've talked to a couple of kind of round of phone calls after that story came out from some of my Republican friends who said, well, he was probably toast anyway. I think that the Democrats are really targeting this district. It's one of the few places where they might be able to pick up a House seat. They're looking at picking up, 1, maybe 3 House seats, something like that. Not enough to flip the chamber. The real battle is kind of flipping enough Senate seats to tie that up, or maybe even take control of the Senate. The districts that they're targeting in the Senate, though, some of them are real long shots. So whether or not the Democrats will be able to pull off an upset that leaves them with some modicum of power at the Capitol will really depend on how large the blue wave is going to be this year, how their voters turn out.
And I want to talk about some of the propositions on the ballot. Let's start with 305, which would expand Arizona's school voucher programs, aka empowerment scholarship accounts. Danyelle, talk about this ESA program.
Yeah. Okay, so the current ESA program is geared towards children with disabilities and other kind of vulnerable sects of students who might need access to a school other than their neighborhood public school, kids that are going to failing schools, and a few other categories. Right now, I think there's a little more than 5,000 scholarships available, and only about 3,000 something students are using them. The expansion would create 30,000 slots that could be filled, and it would open it up to anybody. There would be no priority, at least in the new law, there would be no priority given to students with disabilities. And so this would basically come out of what is now the Public Fund for Education. And so people who are for the passage of this proposition say, well, parents are paying these tax dollars, they should have the right to use these tax dollars however they see fit. And people who are against this proposition say, well, the public school system can't afford to lose any more money. So that's kind of where it stands. This is really kind of split along party lines for the most part. But another interesting thing about Clodfelter, there's been a lot of Republicans in support of passing 306, but he's one of the few Republicans who's against it. And actually, he was one of the few who voted against it when the state legislature voted on this in 2017.
Well, you were there for that vote.
Yeah, I was there for that vote, and there's been a growing number of Republicans who are siding against the bill that they voted for a couple of years
I didn't
ago.
realize that.
Yeah, and Clodfelter was one of the few who didn't vote for it among the Republicans. They're kind of making the argument that, well, because it went through a referendum, there's a Voter Protection Act, and if voters approve this at the ballot, it will be locked in forever, and we can't change that.
Right.
That's kind of questionable whether that's the way that works exactly. I don't think it's ever been tested. I think the real kind of beef is they see that this is going to fail. I would be absolutely shocked if this referendum if people voted yes on this overall. And I think nobody wants to be on the losing side. You even see like the Free Enterprise Club, which was one of the huge backers of this law, now saying, well, we don't care one way or another. There's really a handful of groups that are.
It seems like they had some polling in the Arizona Republic this week that suggested there's some confusion about how to vote on this thing.
Yeah, it is a little bit confusing. You know, I think people were really worried, especially when Invest in Education was going to be on the ballot, that, you know, you're voting yes for the Invest in Education to get more money and no on Proposition 305. It's a referendum on a law, so you have the choice of voting up or down this law that the legislature already passed. If you agree with the legislature, vote yes. If you don't agree, vote no.
It sounds like a tricky message to get out for both sides. But we're going to have to leave it there. We're all out of time already. There's a lot on the table, but Election Day is coming fast. That's our show for today. My thanks to my guests, Hank Stephenson from the Arizona Daily Star and Danyelle Khmara from the Tucson Weekly. My thanks also to our media partners at Tucson Weekly, Inside Tucson Business, Tucson Local Media, Creative Tucson, and Community Radio KXCI 91.3 FM, where you can hear a radio version of Zona Politics at 5 p.m. on Sunday afternoons. I'm Jim Nintzel. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Zona Politics is made possible with the generous support of the Loft Cinema, Tucson's independent movie theater. The Loft features independent foreign and documentary films, cult classics, discussions with filmmakers, and much more, including the Loft Film Fest in November. The Loft is located at 3233 East Speedway Boulevard. Showtimes can be found at loftcinema.org. Support for Zona Politics is provided by Hotel Congress in historic downtown Tucson. More information at hotelcongress.com and 622-8848. The Tucson Hispanic Chamber of Commerce serves the business community in the bilingual, bicultural region of the Arizona-Sonora border and is a proud media partner with Zona Politics. Learn more at TucsonHispanicChamber.org.
These young people from the community come together, actually get up and do something.
We can do anything!
I think we've attracted a lot of people that are super passionate.
We're here at the No Ban, No Wall protest.
If you come out of college, you have this experience, you know how things run, you have a huge leg up.
People who have ideas and who are dreamers, you know what I mean, who really want to get themselves out there. I think that they should come here.
Zona Politics is hosted by Tucson Weekly senior writer Jim Nintzel. The program is produced by Jennifer Powers Murphy and Danny Vinnick and edited by Jim Rundle. Special thanks to KXCI, Tucson Weekly, Brink Creative Digital, and all supporters who provide crucial funding for the program. Learn more about Zona Politics at zonapolitics.com and be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter.